Okay, well, let's get started. Welcome everyone to our second session of the Beginning Care Farmer series. My name is Kate Mudge and I am with CFN. We also have Andrea and Woody joining us today to help out, and Woody will be our guest presenter towards the latter part of our time together today. I just want to thank you for coming. Say that it is great to see you all here. We really appreciate your interest in care farming, your attendance, and your curiosity. So today we're going to be talking about exploring business models and facility land options for care farms. Before we get started, I just wanted to bring your attention to the fact that this is a three-part series. Last week we had session 1, and that covered, so you want to start a care farm, where to begin. That also included a discussion around funding your care farm. If you weren't able to make that, we did record that session as we're doing today, and we have a resource list that was sent out to registrants. Always happy to reshare that. You can also find it on our website. And next week will be part 3 of our virtual series, and that is actually going to cover our brand new mentorship program. And just to call out, this is going to be a new program, and it is specifically designed for aspiring care farmers who live in the Northeast region of the United States who are working with folks with intellectual and developmental disabilities. You can find a lot more information on our website about the mentorship program, but that's going to be a place where we talk more about the program, describe who it's for, how to apply, what it entails. So if you're interested in applying for that program, please be sure to register for that event. And as we move through today's session on business structure and facility land options, you might have some questions. I want to make sure that you get your questions answered. We should have about 15 minutes at the end of our session for Q&A. You can always pop those questions in the chat. I am going to do our presentation and then allow Woody to say some words, but if you've got something top of mind and you just want to throw it in the chat, please feel free to do so. You may also notice that we are focusing these sessions on farms that are located in the Northeast region of the US, specifically those that serve individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities. And part of that is because we have received support from the National Institute of Food and Agriculture through the USDA, which has offered us some grant funding. So even though that is our focus on these sessions, we know that you're coming from all across the United States, and we really hope that these sessions are helpful to anyone, regardless of whatever area of the country you live in or whoever it is that you are looking to serve. So this is some technical stuff that we're going to be going over today. And here's our session overview. We're going to be talking about the structures of care farms, including nonprofit and for-profit models, also what it means to look like to partner with an agency. And then we're going to get into things to think about in starting up a care farm, whether that's finding land, identifying your needs, planning and adapting, as well as some logistical and technical questions. So there's going to be a lot shared. The good news is that we will have a resource list that we will be emailing out after this session. So a lot of the types of programs and models and whatnot will all be incorporated both in the presentation itself as well as that resource list. So you won't have to take a ton of notes. So kind of jumping in, business structures. They are not as complicated as they may seem. But when setting out to form a care farm, you are going to want to research each type of business structure, because understanding what they are and how they work, how they benefit you, and possibly how they might burden you can help ease that anxiety that's associated with choosing which one is best suited to your needs. So we're going to jump right in and talk about a for-profit limited liability company, an LLC. So an LLC is exactly what that says. It's a for-profit model under state statute. Each state does have different regulations for LLCs. And if you are an operator of an LLC, you're called a member. For many states, members can be individuals, they can be corporations, they can be other LLCs. There's no maximum number of members. You can be single member or multi-member. But generally, you can elect an LLC to be taxed as a corporation or as a partnership. Conversely, you have a nonprofit organization, a 501c3, and that's organized as and operated exclusively for religious, charitable, scientific testing for public safety, literary, educational, or another specified purpose that is recognized by the federal level, the IRS. And we have some pros and cons to each of these models. We're also going to talk and highlight some farms and why they chose their specific model. And as you can see, some of the pros of an LLC for profit is that you can protect your personal assets. They tend to be flexible, and your income is only taxed once. One of the cons is you need to file articles of incorporation with the state and establish a business name. Might not necessarily be a con, but just something to know. Going to nonprofits, there are some significant tax and financial benefits in operating a nonprofit. It does, as I mentioned before, tend to be a mission-driven organization. You will be able to have many people who will volunteer their time, and any donations that you receive are tax deductible. Each of the states that, excuse me, where you would register your nonprofit have certain applications, and those can seem a little daunting. They require an article of incorporation and creating bylaws. Nonprofits also require a board of directors, which needs to both be created and then have some oversight. And your annual tax return filings are open to the public for inspection and review. And there's certain things that you would need to do as a nonprofit in terms of filing your end of year financials. So some of the differences between the two, as you can see with a nonprofit, you can solicit donations. You have this board of directors. It can be very attractive for volunteers because there are some restrictions around using volunteer labor, if you will, as a for-profit farm. Conversely, as a for-profit LLC, you can protect your personal assets. It has some tax benefits and it tends to be fairly flexible. This is just a map. It's a little bit outdated right now, but the information is still the same. This is a map that's on our website, and you can actually filter by care farms and find out whether or not they're a nonprofit, whether they're a direct service provider, or whether they're a for-profit. And a year ago, when we did this, you can see by and large, the majority of care farms in the network are nonprofits, 21 are for-profits, and 7 are direct service providers. So just some examples that might help you understand why some farms chose to be LLCs and what factors caused them to decide. Jennifer owns Little Otter Flower Farm in Bedford, Virginia, and she started the farm for Max, her son with autism. And Jennifer shared that they opted for an LLC model, mostly due to tax efficiency. You can go ahead and read the quote here, but there were some regulatory issues that were associated with it, a nonprofit that they felt they had the resources to start the farm. Another example is Ohana Farm. It's a small family-run farm in Williston, Pennsylvania, and they produce small batch gourmet apple cider and apple butter with the help of some folks with special needs. And here you can read why Ohana chose the for-profit LLC model. As you can see too, they have many facets to consider around what your equipment and space needs are, what your liability is. Bolded here is a consideration around the importance of donations. We will get into the fact that for-profits can solicit donations, but that's going to look different than a nonprofit because for-profits are not tax exempt. Blossom is a Chapel Hill-based flower farm and design studio that offers locally grown organic arrangements. And their farm is owned and co-operated by Remy, a young man living with autism. Blossom formed a unique partnership with the Division of Vocational Rehab. And their son Remy, who owns the farm and works full-time alongside 3 social care farmers. And as an LLC, they actually use the Kickstarter platform to raise non-taxable donations to purchase a delivery van. So if you choose the LLC model, here's just a list of steps that you would need to take. Articles of incorporation are a set of documents that are filed with the government body to legally document a corporation's creation. And these legal documents contain general information about a corporation, such as your business name and business location. The articles is the document that's filed with your state to create a corporation. And most states ask for only basic information about the corporation. I should note, though, that some do require more information than others. And all states require an in-state registered agent who is a person signing the agreement. LLCs can also use an operating agreement to reduce the chances of disputes if there are multiple members. Single member LLCs can benefit from an operating agreement, especially if a sole member relies on a manager to conduct business. Without an LLC operating agreement, any legal actions against you or your company will rely on the provisions that are established in your state's code. So creating a company agreement allows you to exert more control over the rules that govern your company's management. Exploring some nonprofit farm examples. We have Woody, who will be chatting with us, who is the founder and executive director of Red Wiggler Community Farm, founded in 1996, located in Germantown, Maryland. And they operate an organic CSA and employ growers with and without disabilities. And Woody notes here that he, as founder, chose to operate as a nonprofit. He had an angel investor. He knew he was going to need some additional operating capital. So choosing the nonprofit status was the best option for him at the time. And as you can also see, only 15% of the revenue is coming from sales. So they are relying very heavily on fundraising efforts. Another nonprofit example is a Farm Less Ordinary, located in Virginia, providing employment and a welcoming community to people with developmental and intellectual disabilities. Founders Maya and Greg decided that they were creating their son's forever home, which would be a farm where he and other adults with developmental disabilities could find paid work, acceptance, and meaning. So in 2016, they became a 501c3 nonprofit. They began accepting donations. They began by operating a CSA. They built their own packing and cooling shed and partnered with local organizations to provide fresh produce to low-income families. And in 2020, they secured a second farm location. Homesteads for Hope is another example. Located in New York, they chose to form a 501c3 so they could receive charitable donations and be tax exempt on their property. Jenny, their founder, notes that regardless of what structure you opt for, you should always operate like a business. Your revenues support your mission. So you shouldn't assume your status will simply fund your organization. It's really important to think about multiple income streams. And Homesteads for Hope has a unique revenue stream where it charges for various programs, including an on-farm membership, CSA membership, and participation in its Ready, Set, Grow programs. Jenny also spoke at session 1 of our Beginning Care Farming series, and she is a fantastic presenter with tons of knowledge. So I highly recommend if you didn't attend or listen to session one that you do, because she's beyond inspiring. And then Muddy Boots is yet another nonprofit farm whose founders, Tom and Lindsay Yoakum, began to plan for their 9-year-old son's future. So they knew that their son, Porter, would need support for the rest of his life. He would need a comfortable home where he could be cared for, and he would need access to activities that he enjoyed. They also wanted him to have meaningful work. So they began to dream up an ideal job where Porter could work alongside both disabled and non-disabled peers. They asked themselves what kind of job Porter would enjoy, what he got excited about every day. And aside from puzzles, he loved being outside, engaging in heavy work, and getting his boots muddy. So the real service they're providing is inclusive employment, opportunities for their staff to work and learn and grow together. Cura Personalis Project, another nonprofit located in Montgomery, they provide pre-vocational and vocational training and meaningful day program to young adults, transitioning youth with developmental disabilities. Most participants are accompanied by support staff and funded through the participants' self-directed budget. So individuals can participate 1 to 5 days per week. The program fee is based on the number of days that the participant is working, and the monthly program fee can then be paid privately or through the participant's self-directed budget as job coaching and training. So here are the steps to setting up a nonprofit. You should absolutely research your state's nonprofit regulations first. And you can find a list of state associations in the chat, which Andrea will throw in there. Again, each state has their own association for nonprofits. But you are looking at, again, incorporating as a nonprofit, selecting your board of directors, working on your articles of incorporation, your filing, registering to fundraise, potentially even investing in some kind of management system to track your donors. Nonprofit organizations also need a structure to apply for the tax exempt status with the IRS. But aside from this, it should note there are other benefits of filing for the incorporation. It secures the name for your organization. No other entity within your state can take this name. It does limit your personal liability. And your articles of incorporation contain clauses that limit the liability of your trustees, your directors, your staff, and your other founding members. They also add credibility to your nonprofit. As a legally recognized entity, you can attract more supporters. And when you create a nonprofit, one of the most important steps is going to be to draft your organization's bylaws. These are the paperwork that establishes the internal rules for how you operate your organization. The board of directors is tasked with setting the policies and overseeing the nonprofit, and they will follow the rules and procedures that you outline in these bylaws. Some states require nonprofits to have bylaws, but it's a good idea to have them even when they're not required, because they help the folks run your organization. And they can address things like how you resolve conflict among directors or between staff in your board of directors. They also demonstrate to the public and to the IRS that your organization is responsibly managing donations to further your nonprofit's charitable mission. And we're not going to get too much into this, but I did just want to touch on the fact that you would need to recruit board members. And as a founding organization, oftentimes board member recruitment starts with friends and families. And then once you are established, you can kind of fill the seats in on the bus with people with specific skill sets that might be beneficial to have as board members, such as folks in the legal field, technology field, marketing, fundraising, perhaps even a CPA. So perhaps you are an employee at an existing social service organization and you want to champion a care farm idea. because sometimes care farms are born from within an organization. And the story of Langton Green, which is a care farm in Maryland, is just one example of a provider that developed its own care farm. And they started with a business plan that would increase to expand their existing day services and supported employment program to include an agricultural property. They thought that that farm would provide an administration facility for day services while also providing significant expansion in programming opportunities, which were focused directly on vocational training, and that would provide activities for individuals who really weren't satisfied with the services in the traditional site-based programming available in the area. So their initial proposal was to have some produce production, make all the produce available to their 35 homes that the agency operates. And at the same time, they gained the expertise to ultimately develop a traditional CSA program in addition to the produce used directly by the group homes. It took over a year to get approval to move forward with the property from their board, but as they engaged in mentorships and trainings with Red Wiggler Community Farm, they also brought in other partners like their ag development councils. They talked with their local soil and conservation district office. Their county staff assisted in providing contacts for a wide range of equipment and information that was really invaluable in helping them to secure some USDA grants. And they also began sending coaches and directors to annual local agriculture conferences. And then lastly, they added several additional administrative roles to include development department. Funding for equipment and materials for agricultural processes was developed through grants and donations beyond the initial equipment package. And they've been successful in pursuing external funding and have been awarded several part-time grant writers and development managers over the past 10 years. Oops. Sorry about that. Care farms can absolutely bring value to a provider agency. So at Capabilities, this farm became the face of the agency. They formed relationships with the community and with vendors. And as a direct service provider, Capabilities now operates Capabilities Farm as a separate social enterprise. They have a garden center, hoop houses that provide individuals with training, employment, and opportunities to interact with the local community, generating over $2.5 million of farm sales. And not only does the care farm provide vocational training, but they are also, more importantly, ambassadors of the organization. In founding Capabilities Farm, one of the staff member had always asked, how can we be a resource and a destination for our community? An alternative model is based on possible partnerships, because you might ask yourself, is there an agency or organization that has land and serves a client population where I could start up a program? Or is there a place that you can develop a fiscal sponsorship with another organization? And there are plenty of care farms that have chosen one model and migrated to another. So while these are really important things to be thinking about, it's also just as important to be thinking about being nimble and adaptive. Some of the resources that I just want to point out here, because a lot of this stuff requires legal support and some professionals behind you helping you out. Farm Commons is, we highly recommend, membership is $99 a year. There is a 2-week free trial. And they provide just tons of legal workshops and resources in a community for farmers. They have a podcast, so please do check them out. There's also Farmers Legal Action Group, and as mentioned before, the National Council of Nonprofits, which if you're not familiar with your state council is, they can send you that way. And there are also many questions you may not even know to ask. So this is just a reminder that service providers such as Farm Commons can really help sort through issues as they arise and help you prepare for potentially sticky issues and situations. These slides here are just two examples of the types of webinars and that they provide to members. And then as a network, we can offer your support in a ton of different ways. We offer consultations, we have member gatherings. We're always willing to connect you with another care farm, particularly care farm in your region, so you can pick their brain and get good advice from people who have walked the road ahead of you. So please lean on us too. All right. Whew. Now we are going to transition into talking a little bit about facility and land options and what's right for you. Because whether you already have land available to you for a care farm, or maybe you're just in the early stages of searching for land, we're going to explore some ways to get you started. First and foremost, location. You can find farms, care farms in rural areas, urban areas, suburban areas. You see here, we've got the Philly Goat Project in inner city Philadelphia. They provide opportunities for urban residents to connect to nature. Growing Solutions is a 1.2 acre produce farm located in Chicago that supports public high school transition students with autism to gain vocational skills. Many care farms located in rural areas. The Homestead Farm Center in Fairmont, West Virginia. These are very much kind of the norm, I would say, in care farming network, and really well represented. But we also have suburban care farms. And again, I'll point out Red Wiggler Community Farm. They can be offer a farm setting in sort of a middle ground. So the types of things that you need to consider we'll also need to differentiate between those who have access to land and facilities versus those who are in sort of the land seeking stage. So we're just going to talk quickly about those who are looking for land. 3 issues come to mind. You need to develop a list of needs. You need to identify what resources you need for land access, and you need to think about leasing versus buying. So if you're looking for land, some of the questions you might have: how much space? What location? Transportation. We hear time and time again, people who operate care farms underestimated the transportation question when thinking about whether or not there's public transportation or how people will get to their location, particularly those in rural areas. What are your infrastructure needs? What are your accessibility needs? Obviously, what can you afford? And what communities, what access do you need to communities? There are a ton of resources that are available to search for available farmland. These are just a few of them. Again, they'll be on our resource list. You can also reach out to regional or statewide organizations that may offer additional land search services. You could connect with a local real estate agent, recommended to specialize, working with somebody who is specialized in listing agricultural lands. And then here are just a few examples of LandLink, county and state LandLink or FarmLink sites. Sites like these allow you as a land seeker to look at what landowners are posting as available for either purchase or for lease, allowing you to be connected with those who have property available. When weighing options between leasing versus buying, obviously there are several considerations: your budget, local community, what your programming needs are, what your own personal living arrangements are, and the ultimate goals of your care farm should all be considered. There are also a lot of online tools available that can support you in working through these questions. One example is Acquiring Your Farm, which is offered by Land for Good. It's a free online tutorial for aspiring, new, and beginning farmers who are preparing to access farmland. They contain lessons organized around 7 topics, as you can see here, and they're designed to provide a really thorough introduction to what can be some complex issues of farmland access or tenure. There's also a farmland assessment guide that they offer that can help you examine site conditions and variables that will affect the viability of your farm, and is intended to help compare potential farm properties or leasing opportunities. And alternative models to leasing and buying farmland exist. You can partner with an organization to create a farm program, as mentioned before. There are options to lease space from other organizations or entities, such as Parks and Rec or county land in a public-private partnership. The point is here that you should be open to all options and explore alternatives. So just to mention, and Woody will dive into this a bit more, but Red Wiggler Community Farm is just an interesting and innovative example of a lease agreement. As in 2005, the farm moved to its current location, and there was a public-private partnership with the Maryland National Capital Park and Planning Commission. So Red Wiggler Community Farm currently leases 12 acres. They serve over 1,900 community members through their CSA program. And with leases, again, there's some pros and cons. They can be quicker to start and there's less investment. You can pilot test an idea and not a big upfront investment when you're looking to lease. But of course, some of those cons is there can be strings attached. You might have to vacate with short notice, and it can be difficult for long-term investors or investments. But if you're in the fortunate position where you do have land or have access to land, there may still be decisions to consider. Just remember, because you're doing a good thing, it doesn't mean though that they're going to change zoning laws. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. You may want to start raising chickens and then you end up raising goats or raising pigs, and that's fine if you've chosen the right property to begin with. It's more difficult if zoning or other restrictions allow for chickens, but nothing else. So make sure to find out exactly what you can or cannot do in terms of livestock and fencing or building additional structures. Asking these types of questions that are on this slide can help you lead the way to your decision. And bear in mind, zoning laws can change. Your property zoning status can be amended through what's called a proposed zoning or land use change. That can be initiated by private property owners or the municipality itself. It can even be initiated by your neighbors. So this can work in your favor. It can also possibly work against you. For instance, if your neighbors have issues with your operation. The lesson here, early on, reach out to your county and local representatives. They are here to serve you, and they're here to tell you what you can and cannot do on land. In general, having a good relationship with neighbors is important. I think we all agree on that one. But in care farming, it's really even more important. Plenty of established care farmers have shared stories of their neighbors or people in their communities being concerned about having a care farmer for a neighbor. And this is why it's so important to talk with your neighbors, explain your mission, explain how you'll be a good neighbor, and to allay any misplaced fears that they might have. So on-farm activities also require insurance above and beyond the standard liability coverage, usually under a commercial policy. And the extent of coverage depends on specific risks. It depends on how often people are visiting your farm and what types of activities are occurring. So as with any insurance, it's really critical to understand exactly what's covered, the cost of the policy, and the level of exposure. There are many types of insurance you may need, depending on what types of things you own, operate, and who visits. You're probably familiar with general liability. Director and operators is specifically for nonprofits and protects board members of charitable organizations. You have insurance endorsements, which can modify your existing coverage. And there are many examples. such as adding an additional person to your policy or adding coverage for specific activities, such as horseback riding. And umbrella insurance is a type of personal liability insurance that can cover claims in excess of the limits of your regular insurance policy. I think this is where we stop and say that we are not insurance providers. And this is always, you should always be consulting with a legal professional. Again, this is where Farm Commons can be very, very helpful in helping you navigate the types of policies and get more knowledgeable about what it is you'll need. Legal agreements should be created if there is a partnership between a landowner and an organization. And these agreements should outline lease rates and what activities are allowed, what activities are not allowed, and the arrangement between the owner of the property and the tenant. An example of a good lease agreement is Full Pocket Farm in Virginia. They operate both a nonprofit entity and a for-profit entity on their property. And they host farm-based and social educational events through their nonprofit. And they created a lease agreement with the LLC branch of their farm. When starting out, they recommended that agreements do not have to be full of jargon. They don't have to be full of legalese, but they do need to be clear. And their advice, if renting from a friendly landlord, is to clarify all potential issues. These are just a few of them. So understanding your farm space is really integral to successful operation. As you develop your farm, there's a lot of things that you need to be thinking about and considering. So where are people going to park? Is there room for larger vehicles, such as buses? And when people arrive, are your routes clear? Is your parking well marked? Bathrooms, do you have them? Do you need them? Where are they? Are they ADA compliant? Signage, do people know how to find you? Does your website or your social media page provide really clear instructions for how to get to your place? And farms clearly provide numerous physical dangers. So identifying them all through thoughtful research, thinking about where people can and cannot access on your place are all very important. Accessibility. Is your farm accessible for those who do not drive, who do not use public transportation? If public transportation isn't available, what other options are there? It's also important to have a place to go when there are storms or excessive heat or other weather-related issues. So think through protected or covered shelters too. We surveyed some care farmers. We asked them, how did you acquire your land and your facility? And how has your setting influenced your farm? You can read Jen's, again from Little Otter, response here, that they're rural, but conveniently located to 3 miles from the center of town. So it's nice to be close. Interns can easily get to them, but there's no public transportation. Again, that has been a huge issue for the interns who aren't part of the school program. And John from LinkedIn Green. The setting was one of the biggest factors in the suitability of the site. It's central to most of the homes for their participants, and it's situated near a large number of suburban communities that could benefit from the access. Jenny, again, from Homesteads for Hope. Location. Think about public transportation for those you serve, access to community, who your customer base is. They're in a rural town on a major road, but 10 minutes from a major city. That works for them. And at Full Pocket, it was important to be rural, but again, wanted to be close enough to an urban and suburban population in order to get transportation for participants and attendees. Also to be a resource in their part of the county. When starting a care farm, it's not always necessary to make large investments immediately. For example, you can create a vegetable garden with a few resources and creativity, and participants can help manage a farm. You can guide them in small groups. If it turns out your care farm is already attracting more participants, you can gradually think about investments, such as a group room for the participants where you can also offer indoor activities in case of bad weather, or where you can use the breaks for lunch. To get impression of what resources and investments you will need as a minimum to get started, it is really highly recommended to visit several different care farms. Learn from those who have been in your shoes. So as I've mentioned, Woody is joining us today, and he's the founder and executive director of Red Wiggler Community Farm. And he's going to walk us through some considerations and decisions that he had to make when starting and operating Red Wiggler. It looks like Woody's in the dark.
Yeah, sorry about that.
That's okay. I'll spotlight you though.
We'll try to find a better spot.
Well, we have some. Oh, there you go.
Yeah. There we go.
So, Woody, you're going to talk
I'm
to
sitting
us
on my
about.
couch now. This is amazing.
Beautiful. Well, welcome. Thanks for telling your story. Feel free to tell me when you would like me to forward any of the slides.
Yeah, if you could jump to slide 86, the last one that you have me speaking to.
You
You've
bet.
Kate has covered a lot of items that I might have talked about. What I think would be valuable is, sorry for the lighting. Uh, this would be overwhelming for me if I had heard this 29 years ago. It's just a lot of information. And for me, I think at that time, I didn't have access to an organization like the Care Farming Network. The ag community was very much about commodity crops and not so much about table crops, and certainly not at all about care farming. Um, so don't panic. This is a good wake-up call to hear all of these steps that you need to think about. Um, and just to pick up on a couple of threads, we did start with the early idea was to be a community garden and composting in underutilized sort of sand lots in Tucson, Arizona, of all places. And composting was the thing we were going to do. And that's what the story I told to raise the initial startup money from an angel donor. Uh, but I happened to return back to the East Coast where I'm from Richmond, Virginia. But I landed on a friend of mine from high school's couch in Maryland. And those guys were running a CSA in 1995. They had done 3 years of running a CSA, and they were leaving and moving to Idaho. And I said, well, tell me about the CSA. And they shared about how it worked and how community oriented it was and local and all of that. And I was like, well, that's perfect for what I want to do with adults with developmental disabilities. I want to provide an inclusive job, and I want to find a way to increase the nutritional value of the food on their dinner table. Uh, and so I completely pivoted from running a community garden in Tucson, Arizona, to moving to Maryland, where I knew no one except for the landowner. Now, these landowners it was a private family, and their main issue was they didn't want commodity crops grown on their farm anymore, and they wanted it to go organic. And at that time, organic was much more looser and whatnot. So organic with a small o. Um, and I said, well, I've raised $10,000. Uh, I'll hire a farm manager and I'll hire some adults with developmental disabilities working with the ARC of Montgomery County. And I will be common thread. You won't have people coming and going. They had had a series of, I think, 3 different farmers staying on their land for only 3 years. And I said, well, our farmers may come and go, but I'll be here. And so that's how I got into the property, which is really the biggest issue. We can talk all day long, but if you don't have a place to run your idea, physical place, that's tough, uh, near impossible. Um, Ultimately, as Kate had said, um, we realized early on, our board and myself, that the family was going to ultimately sell the farm, and we probably needed to keep an eye out for other opportunities. And I'll just keep it short. Um, I would tell anybody that would listen that we're really looking for um, long-term situation with a long-term lease. At that time, we had been running it for 3 or 4 years, going on 5, feeling pretty confident we had a good idea and it was working and the community liked it and the people were doing well. Um, and so we ended up in a public-private partnership with our park system in Montgomery County. That is where we are today. 12 acres, $1 a year rent, um, uh, some considerable considerations or cons, if you will, because you have to operate to the park's rules and procedures, and there are things you would think that they would be okay with that they aren't. And that's another piece I want to share, and I think that it's in the notes, and I'm watching my time. Um, if you are in these situations where you're working with an organization that's much larger than you are, you're a startup bootstraps organization, you're making it happen, you're serving a handful of people, and you see how to grow it, and you want to do that. But if you're working with the park system of a county our county has a budget of $4 billion. So we're in a high net worth sort of region. Um, the park system has lots of rules and regulations, and you just have to. I like to say, I had to realize I was trying to push a rope uphill because I wanted them to operate like me, like a bootstraps organization, fast, agile, but that is not how they work. So learning their work plans and their cycles of making decisions, budgeting, and so forth, and permitting and all of that. You just have to bend um, to your landowner if you're leasing. And like Kate said, I think something along the lines of 90% of the care farms out there on our map of roughly 300 care farms, what, 85% of them are nonprofits. Um, with that, I think I've said all I need to say. I hope we've left time for, I don't see a clock. I hope we've left
Yeah,
time.
we do. Thanks, Woody. And thanks for kind of sticking around because I did want to open this up to, we have about 10 minutes here for any comments that you might have around whatever's been presented. I think I'm going to stop the share here if that's okay. Um, any specific questions around the material or topics that were raised? Questions for Woody about his experience with Red Wiggler? Anyone's head feeling like it's going to pop off because that was just a lot of stuff? I wanted to take down that big slide that said that, you would have been paralyzed if you, we'll keep it on the,
I really would have. I'm a creative person, and rules and regulations I've always shied away from. And if I didn't have, somehow I pulled it off because we had a great board, and I found a mentor. and I pushed through. But I will tell you that there were mental health concerns during that time. It was not an easy time. Uh, but had I had the support of others who'd come before me, when I did it in 95, essentially 95, there was Camp Hill communities. Um, and everything seemed on one hand like daunting, but on the other hand, like the wind was in our sails. Once I decided to really push it, the doors started to open. It's almost, I hate to say it, but it's true. It's almost a spiritual thing that if you find your path, I really found my path. This has been a wonderful experience for me personally. I've worked hard and we've served a lot of people, but I think I've been served as much as anybody else. Um, and so, and I've, anyway, I don't, there weren't any questions, so I decided to go on a rant.
Well, I think what I'm hearing is that, you, first of all, is the founder of Red Wiggler. We now have the Care Farming Network, which is a program of Red Wiggler. We now have Care Farmers, a mentorship model, and resources. And do not underestimate the power of leaning on other farms out there that are willing to share that information, as you, Woody, have done with many farms that even were just mentioned in this webinar. We do have a question here. The question is, I mentioned that a for-profit could solicit donations. Do you mean Kickstarters, et cetera, or is there another way? My assumption is we might be able to raise money via seeking sponsorship, but not provide the tax receipts. Open to any thoughts here. Yeah, so you can certainly solicit funding from a variety of sources. You are ineligible for certain types of fundings if you are a for-profit. So most grant awards, for instance, are going to you to be ineligible for. Kickstarter is, along with other crowd sourcing platforms, a completely viable and useful way of raising donations. You just, yes, would not have the tax receipt to provide to donors for that. There's also, I again encourage you to go back to our session 1. We do have resources from our shared resource list and our resource library around funding a care farm. So if you're looking for opportunities for funding as a for-profit entity, there's a lot that were shared in that presentation. Another question, what is the typical acreage of most care farms? Gosh, I don't know if we've ever done the analysis of finding typical acreage, but it's going to be small, smaller. I'm trying to think of the largest care farms acreage that we might know of.
Camp Hill communities, some of them have 100 acres or more. They're running cattle. Yeah, I mean, the sky's the limit on that one. But you can do a lot on a quarter acre, on a third of an acre.
Yep.
You can do a lot on, we started on 2 acres. It was a larger farm. The farm itself was 125 acres, and we were only utilizing 2 acres. And today we're on a park that's 300 acres, and we only utilize 12 acres. And of the 12, really 4 are in production. The surrounding facility is, takes up space. So are you talking about row feed, or are you talking about the whole physical plant of the operation?
Right. Yeah, Rebecca just shared that the farm that they lease is 165 acres, but they operate their programming on essentially half an acre. I'm located in rural Minnesota, just visited a care farm not too far. They also have, hundreds of acres available to them, but they farm about 5 acres. And I think it bears worth mentioning here that we talk a lot about in the Care Farming Network, what comes first, care or farming? And that is a a perennial question around that it's already difficult to operate a farm. And now you're talking about production and balancing production with mission and all of those things. So all good questions to be thinking about. There is
Yeah,
a question here from Chris.
I'd like to
Oh,
underscore that is, if it's so tempting to go hard on production, but what are you really here to do?
yeah.
And so at Red Wiggler, we've evolved. Had to be scrappy in the beginning. I think that's how a lot of these care farms get started. But ultimately, we put care in front of production farming.
One more question
And
from Chris.
had I pitched it to that way to employees coming in, there would have been a lot less struggle at times. So it really is about when you talk about mission, it's not just to the general public, it's to your employees. And the for-profit world, they think missions sit on a shelf and strategic plans sit on a shelf and they're a waste of money. Not in the nonprofit world, not at all. Uh, it is a tool for management, just like as Kate said, the bylaws when you're starting out, as having good, clear, understandable bylaws that a volunteer board can refer to, is saves so much time in what is it called, conflict resolution, which happens
Yeah.
anyway. Sorry, I didn't mean to hijack you.
No, I just wanted to get to one more question before we wrap up. Christy asks, I know there's probably no simple way to answer this. My question is, what should somebody who's in the early stages without land, but a really great vision, focus on first? That's a hard question. I see we're all, yeah, Rebecca just said a business
Okay,
plan.
I can address that.
Yeah.
So you develop your vision, you start talking to everybody that will listen, you tell a story. That story may change like it did with us here at Red Wiggler. We were going to be a community garden, spending a lot of time composting. Today we're a CSA. It's very different. Um, you just have to start talking and getting feedback from other people as to what they think about your idea, how they could help, what they're excited about, and that will fuel your enthusiasm for moving forward. Um, so it's a psychological game. Um, you don't have the land, but start I hate again, I hate to be sort of spiritual or new agey or whatever, but visualize it. Really. I mean, in your mind's eye, see what you want to do. I can say that it took us probably 25 years to get to what I fully visioned, but it really did happen. And Andrea has been around to see it. Um, but it took years to get there. So if you're in the starting phase, don't give up. Go visit farms, talk to people. Like Kate said, visiting farms is invaluable.
Mm-hmm.
And these people want to share their knowledge. I'll stop after this point. If you're at that stage when you're going to go visit farms, be prepared to leave them a check or Venmo them something, $20, $100, but show them that you value their time. And I usually would do that ahead of time, and they get better prepared for you and your questions. They'll have time for you if you've spent a little, just send them $20, send them $100. Um, I think that's important.
Well, on that note, there are a couple farm tours coming up on October 5th. There's one that's taking place in Minnesota for anybody in the Midwest region at the beautiful 21 Roots Farm, located just north of the Twin Cities. And there's another one taking place in New Jersey. So these are free meetups and farm tours. You can find those on our events page. I was remiss in not noting that we have a national conference that we are have scheduled for January 13th through the 15th. in Massachusetts, which will be the first National Care Farming Conference. Again, more on our website about that. I'm going to pop into the chat here a request for anybody who enjoyed and learned something today. Please take 2 or 3 minutes just to fill out an evaluation. It's so quick. We got some grant funding to host these webinars, and you know those grant funders, they love evaluations. So we have to provide that back. And I think Andrea is going to put that link in. If you don't get a chance to do it tonight, you're going to receive an email. It'll have a link to this recording. It'll have a bunch of resources that we talked about. It'll also have that link to the eval. So thanks ahead of time. Next week, third part of our Beginning Care Farming series, the mentorship program. So for those interested, please do join us. We always have monthly member gatherings. We're going to be skipping one for September, but you can find us the first Thursday of every month. Again, free to attend. They're in our newsletters and on our website. In October, in November, we're skipping October. November, we're going to be talking about safety and some of this liability stuff. And that's a chance for members to talk about what is working for them and what has been challenging on care farms in terms of liability and safety issues. So more there. In the meantime, thank you everyone for coming and spending time with us tonight. It's a joy to see you all. And we hope to see you in the very near future. Good evening.
Well, that was fun.